The island disappeared into the horizon, and he found himself completely alone in an open ocean, with nothing but a life jacket and his thoughts. This is the Amplify Your Business with Matt J Hanham podcast, where I explore the entrepreneurial landscape and have candid conversations with inspiring individuals who are crushing it in their space. Today, I'm going to chat to you. Welcome back. And I'm going to chat to you about 4 books that I believe are absolute must-reads before starting a business. And they're 4 books that should be on every entrepreneur's desk. They just so happen to be in my office. And there's obviously many books out there, and I love so many of them. But these are 4 books that I find are super useful, and I'll come back to time after time and just pick them up and have a skim and or reread them and just go through them, and they help me in different ways. So I've picked a couple of super practical books, and you'll love those. But I've also picked a couple of relatively easy to read, mindset based books, because let's face it, we all know that most of this game we call business is won or lost in the head between the ears of the entrepreneur. So whether you are admitting that to yourself or not, your success is primarily up, and it might be 50-50 right now, it might be 80-20, might be 20-80, but the success and your future success is based on your perspective, your mindset, your growth mindset ability, and where you're going from there. So I've chosen a couple of simpler books to sort of just delve into mindset and just some storytelling. So without further ado, I think I'll start with those. Mindset's a great place to start. So my first book is Peaks and Valleys by Spencer Johnson. And you've probably heard of this book. You might not have heard of this book. I like to talk about this book, but Peaks and Valleys by Spencer Johnson. It's sort of one of my go-to books at all times. I love to have it on the shelf. It's a simple read. It's big writing. If you're worried about if you've never read a book before, if you've never read one of these kind of books before, maybe it's a good place to start. If you haven't read a book before, there's probably something a little easier out there for you. But this book, as I digress, is one of my favorite books to have around. It's a story of, I guess, talks about how you can get out of valleys sooner, stay on peaks longer, have more peaks and fewer valleys, and that, peaks and valleys are connected. And what I'm talking about is mindset, ups and downs. But so peaks and valleys are connected. They have more, they're connected in a lot of ways, because when you're on your peaks, in your peaks, you're potentially making, or you're creating tomorrow's bad times with poor decisions. And, the wise things that you can do when you're in troubled, difficult times, are often the things that create good times tomorrow. So, how many times, I'm sure you can, like this, for me, I can't tell you how many times this has happened, but how many times have you been stressed and deeply focused on a situation and felt like you can't see a way through it at all? Feeling doom, dread, and as you get closer and closer and you're losing sleep and you're not eating, and you might, for me, I grab some chocolate or something like that, and you get closer to the event, and, it passes, and it passes without the worst case you predicted coming to fruition. And that's what this is all about. As the adage says, this too shall pass. And this book is one that I pick up, have a quick read, have a quick skim, whatever I need to do, and it just gives me some perspective around what I'm dealing with. It helps me sort of move into a more grateful and gratitude-based sort of state. And, I would just recommend grabbing yourself this book. So it just makes me, the minute I think about, and if I can stop and hit gratitude just for a moment, if you stop and look around or think, there's always so many things to be grateful for. And you realize that most of those things will transcend the issue in front of you. Like maybe it's a finance issue or a relationship issue. And I'm not saying that these might not be serious problems, but there's always another side. Like I said to a business owner recently who's a great friend of mine, and she was having a tough situation financially. And I said, look, that after this particular date, when a lot was happening for her, there will be a tomorrow. There'll be a day after that. You still have your family. You still have everything else. And that was months ago. She still has her business. And she was able to take actions, thinking from a perspective that she was moving forward. Whereas if you get stuck and you hit that valley and you keep pushing that valley deeper, you're only going to get yourself in a worse place. But we're going to have our ups and downs, and we're going to have our peaks and valleys. And as a good friend of mine, Conrad Francis, likes to say, he only has peaks and plateaus. So he doesn't like to think that he ever gets that low in a valley, but we do go up and down in some way, shape or form. Spencer Johnson's written some great books, and I certainly urge and recommend. This is one of those ones that you don't, I would love to see you grab a physical copy and just have around you from time to time. And it's definitely one of my favorites. The second book from a, mindset type perspective is probably my favorite book of all time. I first came across this book, which is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And I first came across this book by watching a YouTube video of Will Smith singing its praises. And that was many, many years ago. And I said, oh, that's interesting. What's the deal with this book? And I don't know if I grabbed it straight away, but I think I downloaded it somewhere. It is something that I probably shouldn't have, but don't worry, Paulo. I've bought many, many copies of this now. So rest easy that I haven't hacked your book. But I came across it from Will Smith, and he was really just talking about this way, this book and how it had helped him and changed his mindset. And look, it's an easy read. It's The Alchemist is a story of a shepherd boy called Santiago. He's from Spain, and he travels across from his homeland to the Egyptian desert in search of treasure buried near the pyramids. Along the way, he meets a gypsy woman, a man who calls himself the king, and an alchemist, and they all point him in the direction of his quest. What starts out as a journey for worldly goods turns into a discovery of the treasure found within. Turning lead into gold, finding your personal legend or purpose in life. And that journey within, I think, is the important piece. And certainly if you're an entrepreneur, it's going to be tough, right? Things aren't always going to be easy every day, and you have to know what you're doing, what you're out there doing all of this for. I won't delve into sort of vision and mission and all those things, but this book is a great place and a great story for you to get a recheck and think about, where you're at and why are you doing the things you're doing. Look, this is probably my favorite book of all time. It's effectively the Bible of my other podcast, which is the Simple Minds podcast, and you can either Google that or use the handle @Simple Minds Podcast on most of the platforms. And this is a podcast where 6 guys encourage difficult conversations among mates, and we sort of bonded and initially formed conversations around this book. So if it's that powerful for us to build a podcast out of, and for me to sit here and say it's my favorite book, and if you haven't read it, I'd check it out. Look, I gift this book often, and one story that comes to mind of when I've gifted it, which I'd love to share with you, was of an uncle of mine that was fishing in his boat by himself off a little island in the Pacific where my wife was born. And he was fishing by himself. Usually didn't like to fish by himself, but on this particular day he was on the far side of the island, and the fishing line got caught jamming his outboard's propeller. In trying to untangle the line, his boat was capsized. And being an older boat, it capsized and flipped and immediately sunk. Despite fighting hard to swim towards the shore, which was only a couple of 100 meters away, and this is a big, strong man I'm talking about here. This is not a feeble person, but he fought hard against the current, and the current swept him to sea. The island disappeared into the horizon, and he found himself completely alone and in the open ocean, with nothing but a life jacket and his thoughts. Plenty of wildlife approached him, and I can only imagine the emotional roller coaster he would have experienced, only to remain stoic in his behaviour and not succumb to panic. Several hours later, the current reversed, and he was fortunately brought back to the point where he could see this island. And eventually, the current took him to the shore, but this wasn't a shore. It was a cliff face and sharp reef, and the waves crashed him against it. And after hours and hours in the water, he had to climb a 10+ meter cliff and drag himself into the village, cutting up his hands, his feet, were obviously so soft. And, they'd been in water for like 6 to 8 hours whilst he was floating out there in the middle of nowhere. He was a changed man following this experience. And I sent him this book. I don't know if it really helped, but I sent him this book with a note suggesting that he was clearly meant to exist for a reason, to fulfill his personal legend. And hopefully this book would just shed some light, or, he was a religious man, and I'm sure he turned to his religion around this. But I just thought this was a great fable and a tale, because he was clearly, it's a deep story, and I hope you guys can appreciate that that's a deep story, but it shows that the universe will conspire for us. And I think where it comes from is just understanding who you are and what you're doing. Like, please read this book. And if you need a bit more of a push, check out Will Smith's version. I'm sure he sells it to you a lot better. You can find his YouTube clip, and I'll probably link it up somewhere. But the book really, to me, just helped me, when I've been in my tough times in business and even in my good times, it just helped me reset like what I was doing it for. In truth, I haven't actually read or listened to the version. Actually, Jeremy Irons does a fantastic, who's Scar in The Lion King, does an amazing audiobook version of this. So if nothing else, have a listen to that. But look, I'm due a read, I'm due a listen, and it's just been a book that, as an entrepreneur, I think sometimes we can feel a bit alone and feel a bit different than everyone else. And we find ourselves doing weird things at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, like working whilst other people are out doing other things and enjoying themselves. And this, for me, just many times over my career, I would have a read or have a think about it, and it would just cement the fact that, no, I'm on the right path, I'm on the right track, I'm on my path and my track. And I would highly recommend you checking out that book. So, on to a few more, well, 2 more books, and ones that are a little bit more practical in their approach. Another book that is sitting on my shelf that I go to from time to time is Crushing It by Gary Vaynerchuk. So, look, fortunately, this one's a signed copy. But look, Gary wrote, if you're familiar with Gary, or if you're not familiar with Gary, he wrote a book in 2009 called Crush It. And it was basically how to build a personal brand to grow your business. And he was sort of predicting what things were going to look like over the next several years. And let's face it, he got it right. So this book came out last year, 2018, I believe. And what Crushing It is, it's loaded with practical tips, success stories from people that have used his blueprints for success. So it goes through all the social platforms, it goes through podcasting, vlogging, all these types of things. Look, if you're running a business, you need to understand marketing and the future of marketing. And look, getting people's attention is what the future of marketing is. And that really, what has people's attention right now? I can't find my phone right in front of me, but that's probably a good thing I put it away, but they pick up their phones and they're focused on there. Social media is the game. This guy, Gary Vaynerchuk, whether you know him or not, is literally one of the kings of it, without owning his own platform at this point in time. And it's well worth a read. If you're not sure what you should be posting about, how you go about different things, it's an amazing place to start. It's, again, a super simple, very straightforward book that is not going to take you a lot of time, but is certainly a go-to. And I've seen a lot of people use it from time to time to help craft strategies. And I'm not talking about little success stories in here. I'm talking about people like John Lee Dumas from Entrepreneurs on Fire, like other people that have like really taken this seriously and built credible major businesses and platforms off the back of taking Gary's advice. And look, I use a lot of his advice even in my own approach. So definitely check out that book. Last but not least is The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. Now, I haven't read this book for, I guess, a little while, but this book is, well, if you haven't heard about Tim Ferriss, or if you don't know about this book, then you've probably been under a rock for the last decade. But it was just, why it's important is I think a lot of people still need this book. And I found it a real eye-opener for me. And it was the first book that sort of challenged my thinking on tasks, what we do, why we do, how we do it. Should something be automated or not? What does a modern business look like? Like, can we run these online businesses and go and travel the world and do different things? It is possible. It's not as easy as so many people think it could be, but it is certainly possible. And it takes effort and breaking things down. And a lot of people just, 4-hour work week, as if you can work in 4 hours. And look, I'm pretty sure Tim Ferriss does a lot more than 4 hours work in a week, but it's a mindset. It's like, how can I take a task and how can I break that down and take, 1 hour instead of 7? How can I, get 10x more work done with the same time or with no time? Like if I can use a piece of software that costs me $80 a month to perform a task that I used to do, 20 times a month, well, that's time saved that I'll always get back. So, Tim's approach to all of this, it's really an exercise in freeing up you to do more of what you love, period. Like, is that hobbies, travel, whatever. And if you haven't read this book, or even if you have, I'd urge you just to have a skim through and rethink how you go about what you do and what are you doing in your week, month, year that you don't necessarily have to do, and how can you transition these things, or 80-20 what you're doing to achieve higher and greater outcomes with less time. So they're my 4 books that I think literally should be on your desk or on your closest bookshelf. Like, I have hundreds of books. They all live at home. And I have a small collection of books that sort of sit within my studio in the office. And these are 4 of them that I'll grab and go to from time to time. So, just to recap on them: Peaks and Valleys by Spencer Johnson, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and Crushing It by Gary Vaynerchuk, and The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. Again, guys, happy for you to reach out to me. Please check me out on at Matt J Hanham, MattJHanham, Instagram. Find me on YouTube there. And basically, at the end of every guest interview, I like to ask my guests, one book that they'd take into solitary confinement. So I don't, if my answer to this is probably The Alchemist, to be honest, if I had to answer that question myself. But my question is to you, because I always love to hear about great books that I haven't read, or maybe they're just to reaffirm one that I should go back and read again. My question to you as the audience is, what book would you bring into solitary confinement with you if you had to go in there for 1 year? Like, what would get you through? DM me and let me know. DM me on Insta, and we'll go from there. But hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you go out and grab these books. I'll link them up in a couple of places. And until next time.